dive. Today we're wrestling with something pretty substantial. It's complex, but I think also deeply revolutionary.
It really is. We're looking at the Kenemagorian Dominion project.
Right. It's this huge multidisciplinary framework. And it's not just about observing, decolonization in West Africa.
No, not at all. It's designed to actively engineer to build resilient Pan-African futures, and it's grounded, really grounded, in fieldwork. Kenema District, Sierra Leone.
And the sources we have are basically excerpts from a scholarly podcast, Deep Research, it's called.
That's right. And what's fascinating is the sheer mix of ideas they're weaving together. You've got contemporary Pan-African scholarship.
Yeah.
You have rigorous decolonial theory.
And then things like accelerationist praxis and theological ethics.
Exactly. It's this blend of, high-level engineering concepts sitting right alongside ancestral wisdom. It's quite something.
So for you listening, our mission today is essentially to give you a pathway through this. It's a shortcut through what are, frankly, 8 very dense academic interventions.
Yeah, we're trying to distill the core shifts here. Methodological shifts, philosophical shifts.
The kind of shifts needed to move from just watching from the outside, what they call extractive observation.
Right, taking data, taking stories.
And moving towards something else, towards covenantal participation, shared flourishing.
And that term, covenantal, is key. This isn't a passive shift. They actually call the whole process ontological engineering.
Ontological engineering, so building a way of being.
Precisely. Actively using new language,
Yeah.
specific architectural designs, adapting technology, not just to critique what's wrong with a colonial legacy, but to actually construct a whole new mode of existence. And crucially, it's all anchored in the real daily life of a specific community.
The Nuni-Lapierre family.
And their whole diaspora network. These aren't research subjects in any traditional sense. They're the governing authority of this dominion.
Okay, that sets the stage. Let's dig into the first big rupture then, this methodological shift, because it sounds like it changes everything about the researcher's position.
It really does. Episode 1 tackles this head on. The colonial baggage that's kind of baked into traditional Western ethnography, even the supposedly more self-aware forms.
Like autoethnography, where the researcher reflects on their own position.
Exactly. But the problem, as the sources frame it, is the I. Even in autoethnography, the researcher's self, their experience, their perspective, it remains the center, the primary way of knowing.
And that creates ethical problems, right? Because that researcher's I story inevitably pulls in other people.
Intimate others, usually. Family members, partners, close community contacts.
Whose stories aren't actually the researcher's to tell. Or to own, really.
Yeah.
Even if the researcher is from that community.
Right. If they maintain that individual academic viewpoint, that kind of gaze, they end up perpetuating this dilemma about who gets to control the narrative. Whose story is it?
Okay, so that's the critique. What about moving forward? Collaboration seems like the obvious next step.
And they acknowledge that. Collaborative autoethnography, or CAE, it does create a collective we. But it's often temporary. It's usually tied to a specific project, a specific funding cycle, the grant ends, the paper is published, and that collaborative we often just dissolves.
Right. It's an alliance for a specific output, maybe, but not a fundamental change in relationship.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily create lasting transformation or deep accountability.
So if collaboration isn't quite enough, this is where the covenantal shift comes in, and this new praxis they propose, non-autoanthropology.
Yes.
It sounds intense. Can you break down what that actually means for someone doing this work on the ground?
It means they fundamentally reject the academic self as the starting point. Non-autoanthropology throws out the individual locus of inquiry.
And replaces it with what?
With a permanent, binding covenantal we.
Okay, unpack covenantal we.
Think of it like this. If traditional ethnography is maybe like dating the community, and CAE is like a temporary work contract, non-autoanthropology is a full, lifelong commitment. Like a marriage vow, almost. The concept itself is drawn heavily from theological traditions, from communitarian ethics. It's about a vow of permanent kinship, a shared destiny.
Not just a contract based on, research deliverables or mutual benefit for a limited time.
Absolutely not. It's much deeper, which means the entire ethical framework shifts.
Okay, how so?
It moves away from procedural ethics, the sort of baseline do no harm injunction you get from ethics committees.
Which is important, obviously, but
it's a negative framing. Non-autoanthropology shifts to a positive, generative mandate, the mandate of mutual flourishing. The goal isn't just to avoid harm, it's to actively contribute to the well-being and thriving of the entire covenantal unit.
Wow. Okay, so that must completely change the researcher's identity.
Completely. They're no longer an external expert observing or even just a temporary collaborator. They are reconstituted. They become a kin participant,
Kin participant.
meaning they are fully personally accountable, not to a university ethics board miles away.
Which might have limited real understanding or oversight anyway.
Precisely. Their primary accountability is directly to the family community. In this case, the nuneal peer matriarchs and patriarchs are the ultimate authority for the research.
So data isn't collected in the usual sense?
No, it's lived. It emerges through shared labor, shared meals, shared rituals, shared decision-making. The academic institution, its demands, its timelines, they become secondary to the integrity and well-being of the family covenant.
That sounds incredibly challenging. I mean, it's a huge commitment. What do the sources say about managing the inevitable conflicts or disagreements that happen in any family, let alone one incorporating an academic?
That's exactly the core challenge they grapple with. And it leads to how they define the actual practice. They call it inverted exo-autoethnography by proxy.
Okay, let's break that down. Inverted.
Inverted, because usually ethnography looks outward, exo from the self. Here, the self is subordinated, inverted into the collective.
Exo-autoethnography by proxy.
Right. Instead of analyzing a past the researcher wasn't part of, or even analyzing a present from their own perspective, they are actively participating in co-creating a present and a future together. The researcher's individual viewpoint, their subjectivity, is intentionally put under the family's collective narrative authority. They speak for or through the covenantal structure by proxy.
So the biggest shift, the thing to really grasp from this first part, isn't just what they study, but fundamentally who the researcher becomes. They literally have to become family.
Yes, that's the entry requirement.
And that must have huge ethical implications if the relationship is that deep.
It totally reframes risk. The primary ethical danger for the kin participant isn't professional misconduct in the academic sense, or inadvertently harming a research subject.
Because there are no subjects.
Exactly. Everyone is kin. So the ultimate ethical failure, the biggest transgression, is breaking the covenant. It's a betrayal of kinship. It damages the entire relational organism, the whole we.
Is that something they try to measure, that level of trust?
Conceptually, yes. I even coined a term for it, trust ampere. It's imagined as a unit measuring the flow, the ontic current, the vital energy of meaning, solidarity, and trust within that covenantal system.
So if the trust ampere drops...
The system itself is weakening. The covenant is under strain. It's a way to think about relational health as a core system metric.
Okay, let's move from that abstract, foundational idea of the covenant to something more concrete. How does this manifest? Episode 2 talks about architecture, the House Mansion Manifesto.
Right. The building itself, the physical structure in Kenema, isn't just a place to live. It's described as an architectonics, meaning the architecture itself embodies and enacts this whole worldview.
It's like the theory built into bricks and mortar.
Pretty much. It's the living proof, the tangible form of the covenant. They first describe the house as a palimpsest.
A palimpsest, like an old manuscript scraped clean and written over.
Exactly that idea. Think about typical colonial architecture. It often imposes a final, rigid form. It might erase local building traditions, local histories.
Yeah, it aims for permanence in its own image.
The mansion is designed to be the opposite. It's conceived as a living archive. Every repair, every modification, every new layer, whether it's updating the wiring, adding solar panels, putting down new floor tiles, isn't just maintenance. It's a new inscription of intent, a new layer of meaning.
So it respects the past, the memories embedded in the structure.
While enabling constant adaptive change, it's built to be perpetually edited and improved by the generations living within it, according to their needs and aspirations. It's not a static monument.
Okay, that's the palimpsest idea. Then they also call it a rhizome. What does that capture?
That captures its network logic and its self-sufficiency. Physically, it embodies energy sovereignty. The whole structure is designed as an off-grid, self-sufficient system.
Generating its own power, managing water, resources.
Right, which immediately reduces dependency on the often unreliable, sometimes politically charged state infrastructure. It's a practical act of decolonization.
But a rhizome isn't just about being isolated, is it? It's about connections, non-hierarchical connections.
Precisely. The house mansion isn't an isolated bunker. It functions as a key decentralized node in a much larger network. It's connected to other households in the diaspora. Toronto, Nairobi, London are mentioned.
Connected how? through family ties.
Through kinship, absolutely. But also through continuous flows of remittance, shared knowledge, collaborative projects. It embodies what they call rhizomatic learning.
Meaning learning happens across the network, not just in one place.
Exactly. Knowledge flows are multidirectional, nonlinear. There's no single center of control telling everyone else what to think or do. It's just these constantly interacting nodes. When someone in Toronto sends money back, it's not seen as charity.
It's an investment.
An investment in the collective architectural and energetic sovereignty of the whole network, anchored by the kinema node. The community is the curriculum, in a way, and that curriculum spans continents.
This is fascinating, especially how they connect trust and technology. They model the solar system as an ethno-energetic blockchain. That sounds like pure high-concept jargon.
It does, but there's a practical logic behind it. Let's break it down. Think about something familiar, like a rotating savings and credit association. A susu or tontine, common in many African contexts.
Okay. Where trust is everything.
Trust is the only collateral, right? The ethno-energetic blockchain operates on a similar principle. When electricity is shared within the compound, or when people contribute labor to maintain the solar panels, it's not tracked like a commodity transaction, with a price per kilowatt hour. It's logged as a transaction of covenantal trust.
So the blockchain part is like a transparent ledger.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's a system, maybe not literally blockchain tech always, but a system to log who contributed what labor, resources, expertise. It makes the technical infrastructure intrinsically part of the social and ethical contract. It tracks commitment, not financial debt.
And does this decentralized, trust-based logic extend to education within the house?
Absolutely. They talk about the educational commons, practicing things like radical unschooling and polycentric education.
So learning isn't confined to a classroom.
Not at all. It's distributed throughout all the daily activities. You learn systems thinking by figuring out the solar charge controller. You learn practical engineering by helping repair a water pump. You learn economics by managing the shared household budget.
Knowledge becomes the shared resource, cultivated based on immediate needs, not some external curriculum.
Exactly. It's adaptive, responsive learning. It rejects that hierarchical, often Western-centric school model.
And this all ties back to the idea of ownership, or lack thereof. The house isn't owned in the typical Western legal sense.
No, it's stewarded. Stewarded by the covenantal we, the family, the community. This ensures it's maintained, cared for, and enhanced for future generations. It actively pushes back against the logic of private property, enclosure, and extraction.
Did they coin a term for this specific architectural philosophy? I remember reading something incredibly dense.
They did. It was palimpsesta de Lucrezo. It tries to capture everything. The layered history, palimpsest, the networked structure, rhizome, and even a nod to the visionary, almost mind-altering quality of the whole project, Delic.
A single word for a layered, rooted, networked, collective living structure. That's quite a mouthful.
It is, but it reflects the density of the concept itself.
Okay, so we have the covenantal foundation, the living architecture. Let's shift to the intellectual engine driving this. Episode 3 introduces the meta-theory, double transversal transjectivity, or delta T22. This sounds like we're moving into heavy territory.
We are, a bit. But it's necessary because the reality they're dealing with, managing a global diaspora network, local Sierra Leonean politics, deep spirituality, off-grid technology, family dynamics, it's incredibly complex. Simple, linear cause and effect thinking just doesn't cut it.
So delta T22 is a tool to handle that complexity.
Exactly. It provides a kind of geometric language, a framework to map this dynamic, constantly co-creating reality.
Okay, let's break down the two core ideas simply. First, transversality. What does that mean here?
Transversality is about connections that cut across the usual lines. Imagine a standard organizational chart. You've got vertical lines for hierarchy, horizontal lines for different departments or silos.
Right.
Transversality is like drawing a diagonal line. It connects things that wouldn't normally connect directly. It cuts across hierarchies and silos.
So in the kinema context.
It connects, say, the high-level academic theory being discussed by the kin participant directly to the spiritual insights of a family matriarch, and connects both to the practical problem the plumber is facing with the water system. It breaks down the walls between domains academic, communal, spiritual, technical.
Okay, that makes sense. Connecting across divides. What about the second term? Transjectivity. This sounds more philosophical. Is it just a fancy word for interaction?
It's related but distinct. Normal interaction or collaboration usually assumes you have a distinct, subject A and a distinct object B, and they interact. Transjectivity argues that the very categories of subject and object aren't fixed. They actually dissolve into the dynamic relationship itself. Reality emerges from that ongoing participatory process.
Can you give an analogy?
The one I find helpful is dancing. Think about two people dancing. The dance itself doesn't exist solely in partner A or partner B. The dance is the dynamic system they co-create together through their movement and interaction.
So applying that here, the house mansion isn't just an object and the family isn't just a subject interacting with it.
Exactly. The house and the family co-create each other. They're constantly shaping and reshaping one another through their lived relationship. That's transjectivity.
And the model combines these. It's quadratic.
Yes. It maps two axes related to transversality, maybe connection quality and resource flow, and two axes related to transjectivity, perhaps evolving identity and the intensity of co-creation. This creates a four-dimensional conceptual space.
Which they call the kenemagorian phase space. A phase space. That sounds like physics. What does plotting something in this space actually achieve?
It functions as an analytical tool and a strategic guide. Let's take a practical example from the sources. A large collective harvest of cocoa beans.
Okay.
Using the phase space, they wouldn't just measure the yield in kilograms. They'd try to map four interacting vectors. Okay, let's say two. Maybe the efficiency of the workflow, the quality of communication across different roles, the new skills individuals learned during the process, and the strengthening of collective identity and solidarity that came from working together.
So it analyzes the harvest not just as economic production,
but as a complex, four-dimensional event that builds the world, builds relationships, builds capacity, and produces cocoa. It's a much richer picture.
And this complexity leads them to try and quantify emotion, effect. They introduce the joy-entropy equation.
Yes, this is definitely one of the more speculative, but also maybe profound aspects.
Trying to quantify the usable effective potential. How on earth do you put a number on joy?
Well, it's speculative, as I said, but it shows their commitment to making emotional well-being a tangible, measurable part of the system's health. Joy entropy isn't measuring happiness in a simple way. It's trying to gauge the potential energy available for collective action that comes from a positive, affective state.
So if the community feels joyful, confident, unified,
they have a larger reserve of effective energy. They can deploy that energy to overcome material obstacles, external pressures, or internal challenges. If, on the other hand, they're weighed down by trauma, internal conflict, or doubt,
the joy entropy is low.
Right. Even if they have financial resources, their capacity for effective collective action might be limited because the effective potential isn't there. It's a way of saying that morale and spirit are real forces with real consequences.
That focus on quantifiable emotion, on joy as potential energy, leads us straight into episode 4 and the political orientation of the project. Joyful Afrooptimist accelerationism, JOA.
Yes, this is the political engine, the driving force, and it's a very deliberate choice of terms.
Let's start with Afrooptimism. That seems like a direct counter-narrative to a lot of discourse about the continent.
It absolutely is. It's framed as a pragmatic, empowering stance. It's rooted in a fundamental confidence in a future fueled by local ingenuity, by smart technological adaptation, and by strong Pan-African connections.
It acknowledges the problems, the challenges.
Immense challenges, yes. But it refuses to let those challenges define the identity. It rejects what they might see as post-colonial melancholia or a narrative of perpetual victimhood. It's hope, but an actionable, grounded hope.
Okay, and then the accelerationism part. That word carries some baggage, often associated with, wanting to speed up collapse or societal breakdown.
They are very clear about distinguishing their version. They completely reject any nihilistic or destructive forms of accelerationism. Their goal isn't to accelerate the breakdown of the existing oppressive system.
It's to accelerate something else.
Yes, to accelerate the processes they value. Decolonization, achieving technological sovereignty, strengthening communal bonds, building resilience. It's an acceleration of us, the community, the covenant towards self-determination.
So accelerating the positive construction, not the negative destruction.
Precisely. And they explicitly link it to Afrofuturism, the cultural and artistic movement that uses technology, science fiction, and African diasporic history to imagine and build radically different futures.
But if you want to accelerate effectively, you need to know what's holding you back. You need a diagnostic tool.
Right. And their tool is exopsychoanalytic decoloniality.
Exopsychoanalytic. So looking outward.
Exactly. Standard psychoanalysis often looks inward for the roots of psychological distress within the individual psyche, This approach looks outward, exo to the social, political, economic, and historical structures, particularly the legacies of colonialism that caused that distress.
It's like putting Freud on Fanon's couch, as they say,
Oh,
analyzing the system's impact on the mind.
that's a great way to put it. And the primary thing this diagnostic tool looks for is something they call colonial residue lag.
Colonial residue lag, what is that?
It's the internalized patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that are left over from the colonial experience and actively hinder progress towards self-determination. It could be dependency mindsets, collective self-doubt, a hesitation to trust locally developed solutions.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine the family engineers a really innovative solar power management system using local materials and knowledge. It works perfectly. But some members of the community still feel an underlying preference, a greater trust for an expensive imported German equivalent, even if it's not necessarily better. That subtle hesitation, that lack of full confidence in their own creation, that's colonial residue lag.
It's a lag in fully embracing endogenous capacity.
Exactly. It slows down the acceleration they're aiming for.
So this is where joy comes back in, as more than just a feeling.
Yes. Joy, in this framework, becomes a kind of empirical metric. It's a sign that the decolonial process is working. Increasing capacity for collective self-determination, for mutual flourishing that generates joy, confidence, and solidarity.
And that positive, affective state actively combats the colonial residue lag.
That's the theory. The greater the collective joy and confidence, the less hold the lag has, and the faster the community can move towards its desired future, which they call
Prometautopia.
right, another one of their coin terms.
Blending Prometheus.
Forward vision, technology, the firebringer.
With utopia, the ideal place, but not a finished paradise.
No, crucially, it's not a final destination handed down from above or reached at the end of history. It's a self-constructed decolonial future that is always in process. It's continuously actively built by the community itself.
And sustained by what they call effective stamina.
Yes. The collective capacity to maintain that hope, that solidarity, that joyful energy, even when facing struggles, setbacks, and the hard work involved. It's the emotional endurance needed for the long haul of world building.
This is fascinating. We've got the covenant, the house, the meta theory, the political engine. Now, how do they actually speak this new reality into being? Episodes 5 and 6 get into language and spirit, starting with etymological hybridization.
Right. This goes back to the idea of ontological engineering. If colonization was partly a project of imposing language and erasing others, then decolonization must involve reclaiming and reshaping language.
So they're consciously creating new words.
Yes, deliberately forging new vocabulary by grafting together roots from different languages relevant to their context. Mende and themne from Sierra Leone, English, classical Greco-Latin roots, even terms from computation and systems theory.
Like prometautopia or covenant of physics we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. They argue that the existing colonial language, English in this case, often lacks the concepts needed to accurately describe a reality based on covenantal bonds, flat ontologies, and transjective processes. These new words aren't just academic jargon for papers.
They're functional.
They're operational semiotics, linguistic tools designed to actively reprogram the shared understanding of reality within the community, to give them the words they need to think and build differently.
And they use this evolving language to describe the entire project, the people, the buildings, the global network, the theories, as one single vast entity.
Yes, a living hyper-object organ.
Okay, hyper-object is a term from philosophy, right? Something massively distributed, hard to grasp, like climate change or the internet.
Precisely. But they add living and organ. Living because it's dynamic, adaptive, constantly evolving. And organ because it has a specific vital function within the larger Pan-African and global context.
And what is that function?
Its metabolic function, as they describe it, is to process the inputs, colonial trauma, material scarcity, systemic challenges, and transmute them. To output decolonial flourishing, resilience, joy, and sovereignty, it's designed to digest negativity and produce vitality.
Wow. And this living hyperobject organ has its own intelligence, its own nervous system. They call it AI immanence.
Yes, but we need to be super clear here. AI does not stand for artificial intelligence in the usual Silicon Valley sense.
Okay, crucial distinction.
It stands for alliantic intelligence. It refers to an intelligence that is immanent, meaning it exists within. It is distributed across the entire system. It's not external or machine-based.
So what does it include?
It includes the collective human wisdom of the community, the elders, the youth. It includes the embedded logic within their technical systems, like how the solar network manages energy flow. It includes ecological knowledge of the land. It includes ancestral wisdom accessed through ritual and memory. It's the intelligence of the whole interconnected alliance.
So the ethical purpose behind creating this new language is what they term sacred worlding.
Yes, it's about recognizing the power of naming, wielding that power consciously to create a vocabulary that opens up possibilities, that supports liberation, that reflects the sacredness of the covenantal relationships.
And that notion of sacredness leads us directly into the spiritual foundation, detailed in Episode 6, Flatafrotheological Poetics.
This is really the spiritual armature, the deep grounding for the entire project.
Flatafrotheology, the name itself suggests a challenge to hierarchy.
Absolutely. It's framed as a direct rejection of the vertical, hierarchical ontology often found in colonial metaphysics. The idea of a distant god at the top of a pyramid, which historically was sometimes used to justify earthly hierarchies of race, of humans over nature.
So flat means?
Flat means divinity isn't up there. It's immanent. It's distributed horizontally across all of existence. God, or the divine, is understood to be present in the soil, in the water, in the solar panels capturing sunlight, in the ancestors, in the communal body, in every person.
Drawing on Pan-African spiritual traditions.
Deeply. Many indigenous African spiritualities inherently understand this kind of radical entanglement of matter and spirit, the sacredness of the everyday material world. Flat-earth theology tries to articulate this in conversation with contemporary decolonial thought.
And within this framework, they perform what they call the dominion intervention. Given the project name, Kenemagorian Dominion, this seems critical. How do they reclaim dominion?
It's a really powerful move. They take that specific word, dominion, which, in Genesis has often been interpreted, especially through a colonial lens, as justification for human domination and exploitation of the earth.
Right, dominion over nature.
They deliberately intervene in that interpretation. They reclaim the word and radically redefine it. For them, dominion means a sacred covenant of stewardship. It's about profound responsibility for and care towards the entire interwoven web of life, human, ecological, ancestral, even technological.
So it's dominion through covenant, not domination over others.
Exactly. It's an act of profound theological and political reappropriation, turning a tool of empire into a charter for holistic justice and care.
And this theology isn't just abstract belief, it's embodied.
Completely. Prayer, for instance, isn't understood as sending a request up to a distant deity. It's described as intercessional resonance, meaning tuning the community, attuning yourselves to the divine frequencies, the sacred energies that are already present within the material world, within the covenantal relationships.
Can you give a concrete example of how this plays out in daily life?
The sources emphasize that ritual isn't separated from labor. The mixing of concrete for a new building foundation, the careful soldering of a circuit board for the solar power system, the collective work of processing the harvest, the intentional sharing of a meal together. These are all understood as acts of ritual embodiment. They are applied theology.
So the technical work is spiritual work.
Inseparable. When they maintain the solar grid, they are literally tending to the immanent divine energy flowing through the system, ensuring the health and vitality of the living hyper-object organ. There's no split between sacred and secular.
And they even gather data related to the spiritual dimension, pneuma data.
Yes, pneuma meaning spirit or breath. Pneuma data refers to the intentional collection of qualitative evidence about the community's spiritual life.
What kind of evidence?
Things like co-authored community prayers, recordings of shared testimonies, dream journals interpreted collectively, narratives about moments of synchronicity, or perceived ancestral guidance.
And why collect this?
It's a deliberate methodological choice. To empirically, though not necessarily scientifically in a Western sense, trace the tangible effects of this embodied flatafrotheology on the community's resilience, their cohesion, their problem-solving capacity, and, importantly, their measured joy entropy. It provides a vital stream of evidence complementing the technical and social data.
And the ethics underlying this.
Because divinity is immanent in everything, harm to any part of the system, whether it's environmental damage, breaking covenantal trust between people, or neglecting the technical infrastructure, is seen not just as a practical problem, but as a theological transgression, a violation of the sacred interdependence.
Okay, we've built up this incredible theoretical and spiritual framework. Now let's round it back firmly in the place itself. Kenema NOW, the focus of Episode 7. Remind us about Kenema District.
Right. It's a significant area in eastern Sierra Leone, home to over 770,000 people. It's a major hub for trade, agriculture especially, cocoa and coffee, and also diamond mining historically.
And facing typical infrastructure challenges.
Yes, definitely. The sources highlight things like an unreliable national electricity grid, which makes the mansion's off-grid system so relevant. But they also emphasize Kenema's strengths, its cultural complexity, its history of interreligious harmony between Muslim and Christian communities. It's a dynamic, complex place.
So the mansion's off-grid solar system isn't just an isolated experiment.
No, it's positioned as a practical declaration of energy sovereignty within that specific context. And critically, the sources point out that this micro-level initiative is designed to complement, not necessarily compete with, larger centralized state and international efforts.
Like the African Development Bank upgrading the regional grid.
Exactly. The mansion functions as a kind of micro-scale testbed. It allows them to experiment with principles of local stewardship, community ownership, and endogenous technological development lessons that could potentially inform those larger projects, making them more locally relevant and sustainable.
And the intellectual work, the theorizing, happens right there. Seminar as togetherness.
Yes, this is key. Theory isn't developed in some separate academic space and then applied later. It's forged in situ. Around the dinner table while sharing food, during breaks from construction work, while troubleshooting a technical problem.
So the conversation flows naturally between abstract ideas and practical realities.
Constantly. And this environment is where the neologism minting, the creation of new words, becomes a really organic, living practice, not just an academic exercise.
They gave an example, right, around the solar power and a water pump.
Yeah, it's a great illustration. The community faced a technical challenge integrating their solar battery storage system with a newly installed water pump. The discussion involved people bringing different perspectives.
Local knowledge, maybe in Mende.
Exactly. Concepts of flow from Mende language, maybe some French engineering terms from someone's training, practical know-how in Sierra Leonean Creole or Pidgin English, alongside discussions about shared responsibility for maintenance.
And out of that messy, multilingual, very practical problem-solving session,
they collectively birthed the term covenantophysics.
Physics governed by covenantal principles.
Right. The physics of a socio-technical system where trust, shared purpose, and mutual accountability are fundamental operating principles. The solution wasn't just a technical fix. It represented a conceptual breakthrough that validated their whole approach. It was coined out of necessity.
And they frame the project's current state not as finished, but as a success in progress.
Yes, deliberately. It maintains a stance of radical humility, acknowledging the ongoing challenges and learning while still celebrating the innovations and the capabilities emerging from the local context, from the kin participants themselves.
So the final episode material we looked at, episode 8, tries to synthesize all of this, to make it portable. They offer a kind of toolkit, the kenemagorian protocol.
Exactly. It's about extracting the core principles from their specific, highly contextualized experiment and offering them as adaptable methods for others who might want to pursue similar goals of decolonial world building.
What are the key elements of this toolkit?
There are 4 main methodological principles. First, covenantal entry. This replaces the old research paradigm of gaining access to a community,
which often implies a power imbalance.
Right. Instead, the starting point is mutual vulnerability, building trust, and ultimately forming that binding relationship of non-auto anthropology.
Yeah.
Essentially, if you're not willing to become kin, to make that deep commitment, this approach isn't for you.
Okay, number 1, become kin. What second?
Architectonic scaffolding. This means consciously co-creating a physical and social hub, like their house mansion, a tangible node where the community's aspirations can take root and be materialized. It's the structure that houses the covenant. Delta T22 navigational mapping. Using that complex meta-theory we discussed, not just as an analytical tool, but as a dynamic strategic map, to actively identify blockages like spotting instances of colonial residue lag, and to chart new transversal pathways for collective action and resource flow.
And the 4th principle?
Neologistic worlding. The ongoing embedded practice of etymological hybridization, continuously forging and using the shared language needed to articulate and navigate the new reality they are building together. It's building the intellectual and cultural infrastructure alongside the physical.
And perhaps the most radical part is how they propose evaluating success. They offer a decolonial evaluation rubric.
Yes, because if you reject the standard metrics, GDP growth, number of publications, typical development project KPIs, which can be quite extractive.
Then you need a different way to measure progress.
Exactly. Their rubric focuses entirely on the quality of relationships and the community's capacity for self-determination. It has 4 main domains.
Okay, domain 1.
Covenantal integrity. This measures the health of the core relationships. How do they track it? Through things like logs of mutual reciprocity, tracking shared resource management, and analyzing narrative testimony about collective well-being. They even mentioned a flourishing index based on these inputs.
Domain 2.
Ontological sovereignty. This is about measuring the community's actual capacity to define and author its own reality. How much are they relying on their own internal knowledge systems versus external validation? What's the rate of local innovation? How much are they reducing dependency on conditional external aid, it asks. Are we truly designing our own future?
Domain 3.
Rhizomatic density. This looks at the network. It measures the complexity, the strength, and the resilience of the connections, both within the kinema community and between kinema and the diaspora nodes. Is the network growing stronger, more interconnected, more able to withstand shocks?
And the final domain, bringing us full circle.
The joy entropy gradient. This is the ultimate indicator. It measures the change over time in the community's collective capacity to transform struggle, hardship, and labor. The entropic forces pulling things apart into cohesive, productive, and genuinely joyful energy.
Into what they called effective stamina.
Exactly. This gradient is their proof, their evidence, that the decolonization process is actually working at the deepest human level, enhancing their ability to thrive together.
And this whole package, the toolkit, the rubric, it's not meant to be prescriptive.
No, they're very clear about that. It's offered as an open source protocol.
Yeah.
Meant to be taken, adapted, argued with, experimented with by other communities in their own contexts.
Yeah.
They stress radical humility to avoid this becoming just another top-down development model imposed from outside.
They want it to spark diversity, not conformity.
Exactly. Thousands of different experiments in self-determined decolonial living.
Well, it's an incredibly ambitious and deeply integrated vision.
It really is. What strikes me most about the Kenemagorian Dominion is how successfully it seems to connect these incredibly dense philosophical ideas, transjectivity, hyperobjects, flatafrotheology, with the absolute nitty-gritty of daily life and survival in Kinama.
Like keeping the lights on with solar power, sharing food, building walls.
Right. The engineering work is theological practice. The theology is practically applied every day. There's no separation.
It really does set a new and honestly quite daunting standard for what truly non-extractive, collaborative, world-building research could look like.
And those neologisms, the new words, they aren't just clever coinages. They feel essential. They function as real tools for ontological sovereignty.
Giving the community the specific vocabulary they need to manage these complex systems based on trust, kinship, stewardship, words that maybe didn't exist adequately before.
The whole project rests on that fundamental premise.
Yeah.
If you can define your own reality, you gain the power to shape your own destiny.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. It builds directly on what might be the most revolutionary element here.
The use of joy as a metric.
Exactly. This project uses joy, specifically tracking the joy entropy gradient as a core, empirical, even quantifiable measure of decolonial progress and ultimate success. So the question for you is this. If you were to apply that kind of thinking to your own life, or maybe your team, your community, your organization, how would you measure the transformation of struggle, of labor, of challenges into cohesive, productive, positive energy? What tangible metric could you use to prove that you were accelerating towards a more collective, more self-determined, maybe even more joyful future?
How would you measure joy?